Baker. I am from the Polo Community School District, and I'm just going to talk real quickly about how I converted my school's website to a Google site and how I went through the domain setup and all the back-end setup for that as well. A lot of you may be wondering, why do I want to convert to Google Sites, or, kind of what was our motivation to do this? And quite honestly, if you look at this next slide, it is evidence enough why I wanted to convert our website to something a little bit more modern. And believe it or not, this was actually something that our district was paying for. So obviously this is outdated. Add a marquee and a few other things like this, this site would fit perfectly in with the year 1995. So it was on the top of my list to see what we could do about this. And of course I did my shopping, I talked to different hosting providers, and they were all coming at prices that were not exactly school friendly when you're working on a budget. So I considered the option of moving to Google Sites. What is that process going to look like, and how hard would that be for us to maintain as a district? To get started, you kind of need to set up a service backend for your site that helps handle how the ownership of the site works, and also helps handle permissions for viewing and all of these other things. So the first step is you're going to set up a service account to run the ownership of your website, and based off of that, you will use Google Drive and the folders and the permissions within that to kind of handle a lot of the back end stuff, whether content is viewable, whether you're showing documents or other shared content, and that all just kind of ties it in together. So first of all, your service account. For those of us who've been in IT, we all know what a service account is. It's just something that kind of hangs out there and it does one job, and almost anybody can work on it. And I really advocate for any school district, especially if you have a Google domain and you run and you manage that, to go into your Google admin console and to set up a service account. As you see here in the picture on the right hand side, just in my domain structure, I have an OU there just for service accounts, and I've created quite a few over the last years that just run a lot of different functions within the school district. And in this, I would highly recommend that you kind of emulate the same process and create your own service account to run your website, or to take ownership of that as it works in Google Drive. So in my case, I created a web minister account. Honestly, you can call it webmaster, you can call it web owner, admin. I don't really care what you call, but it's always a really good practice to have a service account that runs this for you. I have a lot of personal reasons why I like to do that. First of all, it's just clean, it's neat, and it's professional. And it's not necessarily something that is tied to permissions with you as a user. It's something that exists outside of that. And if you document your passwords well, or you have something that people can reference in case you're not available anymore to work on this website, it still gives them the opportunity to maintain ownership of this within their domain, and to still work with it and not worry about transferring it over or any awkward stuff like that. So once again, it's very important that you always set up your service account. Once you have your service account established, I like to log into the Google browser as that user account, or if you like to kind of keep things a little separate, if you're saving your passwords and stuff, use a version of Chromium, or use a version of Canary or something like that. But whatever it is, you log into that browser as that service account. And then you're going to start working on your Google Drive structure. Now, for my website, I use the new Google Sites. So I'm not using the old Google Sites, I'm using the new version. And what's really nice about the new version is that it completely integrates within Google Drive. And that is really important as you work through the rest of this. So you will go into your browser, logged in as this account, and you can start thinking about your website, what you want, or maybe looking at your old website and trying to figure out some of the key items that you want to do within that, and start setting up a folder structure. As you see here on the right-hand side, as this web minister account, I've got an RTI website that I have someone that maintains, and that's separate and has its own folder structure. And then I have our main district website, which is the one I'm actually referencing for this webinar. And as you see, I've started to populate it with a lot of these folders. And these are all different items that exist that the website itself might reference, whether it's documents that people need to access, or links to manuals, or something as mundane as the school menu. All of these things can exist within Google Drive, and you can use permissions within Drive to make them publicly available to regular users on the internet. So this is usually when you're building your website, a constant work in progress. So you're not going to nail all of your folders the first time through, but it's an initial step that you want to work with, especially like at least with your main parent folder for the district website or separate school buildings or whatever. I actually have the Google site living in that folder, because when you establish a Google site, it goes to live in Google Drive. And of course, you can move that around and work with some of the permissions there. So then after that, you're going to start working with your sharing permissions. Now, by default, Google Drive permissions are going to be very restrictive as to who can see it. You know, it may limit to just people within your domain. And of course, nobody has rights except for the owner, which is obviously the service account. And so one of the first things I do for folders that I know that are public facing, obviously you don't want your main parent folder to have these types of permissions set, but your subfolders is useful to have this in. So within your sharing permissions, you know, your top public access, you're going to want to change that and make sure that the people in the public can view the contents of those folders. And remember, this is for, you know, documents that you might link to, you know, pictures or other content that people need to get to, because that's going to integrate into your Google site. And then of course, for people that might be working on content within these folders, you can set up your Google permissions just like you would in Drive as normal. Set up certain users, like I would give myself edit rights within there. And that's just setting up your standard user accounts as you see on the right-hand side. This is very important because you've really got to keep a handle on your permissions, because you want to make sure that the right people can access the right things. And of course, you always want to make sure that the public does not have access to do things that you don't want them to do. So it's always very important to check your public permissions on your folders. And as I mentioned, you're going to build your site. You're going to go to sites.google.com. And as you see on the slide here, you're going to reference the new Google sites. I've heard tell that someday they're just going to force everything to move to new Google sites. For the time being, there's a little bit of a workaround to get to that. It's really not that big of a deal. And also, as you start creating your site within the new Google sites, when you get to a point where you're at, you know, at a point where you want people to be able to look at it, or you think that it's worthy enough for the public to view, then that's when you can start publishing your site. And this is a very key step, as you see, as you see here at the bottom pictures. When you publish your site, it's going to have you give a name. And it's very important that you remember the name that you assign that site when you publish it, because you're going to use that in the next steps as you work towards making this publicly available on the internet. So that next part, making it available on the internet, is going to be your domain redirection. This is very important because when you initially create a Google site, you know, and you want people to reference it, like the original link is, you know, sites.google.com, your domain name, you know, some weird string of letters, and it's just a real painful and long looking link, and it is not professional at all. So when you set up domain redirection, this truly marries your Google domain with these web resources in a way that is easily accessible by the public without using cumbersome links or anything, any awkward wording in your URL pattern. So the first step is to map your website to a nice URL pattern. And after that, you're going to work on modifying your public DNS so that those URLs are accessible via Google hosted services. And then a nice third step that I like to include is setting up naked domain redirection. And I'll kind of cover that when I get to those sites. Now, one thing to remember when you do this is that you have to have domain administrator rights within your Google admin console, and you will also need to be able to access your public DNS settings. If you don't have those permissions, this is not going to be possible for you. So the first step is website mapping. This is so that you have a nice, clean URL pattern for your initial website. So when you're doing this from your Google admin console, you're going to go into apps, then through G Suite, then to sites, and you're going to open up the properties of sites, and you're going to find a section there for web address mapping. Now, as you see here in the picture on the right-hand side, this is really straightforward stuff. You will click add a new web address, and then it's going to give you a pop-up window here where you're going to fill in all your pertinent information. So I didn't highlight it here, but it's going to ask for your URL format. I have it there set by default as new sites, but if you are using an old Google site, you can still change that drop down to old sites and still reference that kind of content on the internet as well. But I'm going to keep it at new sites. And then it's going to ask you for your site location. So as I was talking about that really cumbersome, link to get to your site, sites.google.com, blah, 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 it's going to ask for your site's identifier. And when you published your site, that was the name that you gave it. So whether it's elementary school or, cafeteria or, athletic director or whatever it is, you need to remember what you published that so that you can fill that in your site's identifier so that it understands how to reference that website with your new URL pattern. And then of course at the bottom here, in the red part on the bottom, you will enter in that name that you want to give it. Now for me, I just go one for one. If I named it, in this case like the Marco Light, and on the bottom then the URL pattern would still be marcolight.poloschools.net. But you can really fill in any kind of name that you want for it, as long as it's something that you understand and something that you can reference easily. And as a side note, this is something that is really nice for teachers if they have set up teacher pages in Google Sites as well. For example, I have a really nice math teacher who maintains a very nice Google site, and she has her students reference that all the time. And when she first started out using this, she had that really long address that we talked about. Well, I was able to condense that down to, the teacher's last name, .poloschools.net. And now her students, when they want to reference that, it's easier to get to, it's easier to type. And of course, I can set up those links way easier on the website. The next step, I'm going to talk about naked domain redirection. And what naked domain redirection is as a general user, I just know that your domain is poloschools.net. I may not necessarily know that it's, in this case, like if I published it as home.poloschools.net or marcolight.poloschools.net, you may not remember that off the top of your head. You want to go to Google, you just type google.com. You want to go to Hotmail, you just type hotmail.com. And this is something that kind of still allows for that to work for your general users out in the public. In this case, I just want poloschools.net to resolve to one of these websites that I set up. And that's exactly what naked domain redirection will do for you. So in this case, poloschools.net, when I enter that into a browser search bar, it's going to translate that to and redirect it to home.poloschools.net, which is the main district website that I set up. So to get to this, once again, you're in your Google admin console, and on your main homepage, you've got a little icon there for domains. And you can go in there and add and remove domains in Google admin. And there is an option in there for redirect your naked domain. And it's really easy. You just open that up. It'll give you this nice little fill-in place right here, and you just put in that nice URL pattern that you created in the previous step. So you just say, this is the main website that I want to refer to the domain when people try to go to it on the internet, and you just say that and you just put it in. And if you do really need like a Google support document for how to do that, I have included that in the slide, and that material will be released after this webinar. And then your final step is to modify your public DNS. So once again, this is dependent on you having access to your DNS services. For us, it is something that we kind of bought with the Google domain when we set it all up. So this is something that's completely managed by Google. They kind of handle that for us. And as an added perk within the Google admin console, they can just direct you to, the link that you need to modify your DNS, and they'll even give you your username, your password, your PIN, all the stuff that you need to make these changes. So to get to that, once again, you're in your Google admin console. You're going to go to your domains icon, and you're going to go to add remove domains, but there's going to be a nice drop down there for advanced DNS settings. And that's where they will reveal to you your username, your password, and they even give you a really nice link that'll take you to the provider that has hosted all of this for you, so that you can go in and start making your changes. So in this case, when we set up our domain, we opted to have GoDaddy host that for us. And so I go and sign into my DNS console. It'll take me straight to GoDaddy. I can use these credentials, and you can go straight to work as an administrator to modify the DNS. And so what you need to do is, once you get into whatever hosting provider you use and you go to modify your DNS zone, you want to add a CNAME entry. And what that's going to do is it's going to take your specific website as you set that up in your URL patterns earlier, and it's going to translate that to Google hosted services. So if I have a user that's on the internet and they want to go to poloschools.net, and the naked domain redirection kicks in and says, well, actually, that's home.poloschools.net. As you can see here, the CNAME entry in your public DNS is going to say, oh, well, since you're going to home.poloschools.net, I'm just going to reference that material straight to Google hosted services. And of course, your domain integrates with all of that. It understands that this is a Google site that lives, on your drive and does all those things. And it really handles that whole backend for you very nicely. And it doesn't just have to be your main district page. Like you see here, I've got several entries within my DNS for all of the separate web pages that I had built. So if you're going to establish links in your website, you're going to put all that together, you can still reference them by their unique names, which is very useful. And for me, I just think it's very clean and it looks nice and it's very professional. So then now that you've kind of set up your back end, I'm just going to talk about some of the tips and things that I learned as I was building my Google site. The one thing that I really appreciated about it is that the Google Sites integrates with all the Google things that you work with, whether it's docs or slides or anything like that. So you can embed a Google folder into a Google site so a teacher can go there, or even a parent or anyone, and they just see like a list of files in a Google Drive format. And it's really useful. If you've got a digital backpack where you have all this take-home material for your students, you can throw all that stuff in that digital backpack, and people can go to your website and they can say, oh yeah, I missed this take-home for Bobby. They'll be able to find something about a fundraiser or cookie sales or any event that's going on in your school district. It's a nice way to keep it together and still make it universally available to the public. And I can show you that if you'd like to see that in the Q&A section as well. And always when you're creating your site, try to keep your folders separate in Google Drive just for organizational purposes. And as you saw earlier when I was setting up my Google Drive, each site has its own individual Google folder. That's just really good for organizational purposes. Also, when you're building your Google site, this is a great opportunity to refresh your old website. So get your staff involved, get your students involved. I was able to reach out to our yearbook and say, hey, I'd like some nice pictures of the front of the high school to add to the site, or I'd like some pictures from this event or that event. I want to get some content that's up to date to put it on our website. And you would be surprised how, eager some of the students and staff just might be to help put something into this to make it look a little bit better. And as you're building your website and you want to add different pictures or different banners, don't be afraid to use the free public resources that are out there for any kind of content that you need. So I was really dependent on Creative Commons for finding images for me that were approved for reuse, redistribution, or modification. So if you just go to Creative Commons and you start looking for images, whether it's through Google Images that meet that criteria, or Pixlr, or any other kind of image hosting app, they will help you find those resources and give you images that you can use just maybe for a generic splash page, or just for some clip art, or for something that you want to have on your page but may not be necessary content that you generated yourself. Also, this is important for ADA compliance. They don't have something built in that forces you to do this, but if you are adding images into your Google site, they do have an option for alt text, and I highly recommend that you always fill in your alt text whenever you're adding or attaching new images to your Google site. And lastly, you can make a Google Doc universally available, or you can add like a Word document to your links and things like that as they're shared out through Google Drive. That's all fine and dandy, but I like to keep that kind of content universally accessible, so I convert a lot of my public content to PDF so that I know that my users will be able to open it, that there's generally going to be very little trouble understanding that document on whatever browser or device that they're using. And obviously it's something that just isn't something that the public can just write on or modify or anything like that. So by nature, PDF is a little bit more secure when it comes to providing that kind of content to the public. Last, I'm just kind of going to go over some of the pros and cons of my experience using Google Sites. A definite pro for us is it's free. We were able to get rid of that hosting fee that we were using for an outdated website and save that money for our school district. So as you see in point number 2, regardless of what you did, it's a vast improvement from our standpoint of what we were using as a website. The other nice thing about Google Sites is that it renders a lot better on mobile devices. If you're designing it, it gives you the option to say, hey, what does my website look like on a tablet, or what will it look like on a mobile phone, or what does it look like on a laptop? They give you a lot of different aspect ratios that you can play with when designing your Google site to kind of understand how it's going to look like on these separate devices. And I know for myself, if I access our website via, my Android phone, it renders a lot better than our old website. So it's a lot better at moving the objects, a lot better about formatting it and making it universally presentable to people who might be accessing it on a mobile device. If any of you guys are familiar with the Wave assessment, that's kind of a free tool that you can use to assess your website for ADA compliance and just other nasty errors that might be going on. And when I compared my Wave assessment on my new Google site versus the one that I ran on my old website, it was easy to see that we had actually scored a lot better. Whether it's contrast patterns that are available within your default Google templates or any other content like that, it just scored a lot better. It handled it a lot better. And I added a link here at the bottom for Wave if you do want to assess your own website just to kind of see where you stand. Another perk about using Google Sites is that it just integrates with your Google services. So once again, as long as you're familiar with working in your Google admin console or you're familiar with using Docs or any of these other services, it all just really plays nice together. And another nice thing is if you're starting to share out permissions, through Google Drive to the site or to different folders for content, you still have those audit log features available because it does live in Google Drive now, which is very useful because, hey, we used to have these documents in this folder and now they're missing. Well, you can check your audit log and say, oh, well, the secretary must have removed them, or your IT director, pressed a lot of buttons for some reason and that's what happened. And obviously, number 7 is just a fresh start on a new website. So if your website's from 1995, this is a great opportunity to bring it into the new century. Of course, now there are cons when it comes to using Google Sites. For me, there was a lot of upfront time designing and implementing the website. You have to sit, think about what you want. For us, it was a lot of, cutting stuff out of our old website. What is really relevant anymore? Now I'm going to go meet with a principal at this school. Do you even use this page anymore? Is this content that's relevant to us as a school right now? So you are going to spend some time, deciding what you want in your website, deciding what looks good, and then just going through the whole design process, which may be a little difficult if you're not necessarily a creative type. Of course, it is not going to be as robust as some of the flashy paid sites that you get. And I know I sat through a lot of webinars from a lot of web hosted providers, and I tell you, yes, they offer some really slick stuff, but it is also offered at a really steep price, which if you're a school that's on a budget, it may be something that you don't necessarily just want to dump into something right away. The other con that I didn't like is that you can integrate Google Calendar into your Google Sites, but you lose a lot of the formatting options with your Google Calendar items. So if you would color code an item, for high school or one for your elementary school or whatever, as that calendar is brought into Google Sites, everything is just listed blue. You lose a lot of those formatting options. It's very plain Jane. It's extremely functional and nothing else. And obviously, I know that there's other hosted providers that use Google Calendar, and I mean, they format it in a much nicer, much cleaner, much easier to read way. But if it's just something you want to get out there, it does get the job done, and it still integrates, and it's still easy to work with. Another con of Google Sites is that you are limited to, obviously, the CMS that Google Sites offers you. So you may not be able to incorporate certain elements, or it may not be as quite the way that you want it because you do have limitations within the design of Google Sites itself. Not saying that it's necessarily bad, but you can't do a lot of really elaborate things, but it will at least afford you the opportunity for a nice, clean website. Obviously, another con is everybody who used the old website at least kind of knew how to do things on it. And so I had to go through and I had to retrain a lot of the staff on how to use the new website. Now, this obviously will entail a lot of, changing of permissions within that Google Drive that I showed you so that they have access to modify these items. or you may actually give outright modify rights at the Google site level as you share that out. But you need to be careful with how you do that, and you need to thoroughly train your staff on how to use Google Sites, or else you might wind up with a weird picture in the left side of something where it doesn't quite necessarily belong. And then, of course, con number 6, people are just going to hate, and sometimes that just happens, and you will maybe get a little bit of pushback just because it's something they're not used to. So that was my experience with Google Sites and how I went and I set it up, and I'm open to any questions if you have some right now.
All right, participants, feel free to click on the microphone, unmute yourself if you want to ask a question, or use the chat or Q&A box at the bottom. I'll go ahead and pause and give some wait time.
Hey, Dan, can you take us through your website? Just a few pages of it?
You're going to have to repeat that. I couldn't hear you.
Can you take us through a few pages of your website?
A tour of the website? Yeah, absolutely. So once again, I'll just kind of show you naked domain redirection at its finest. I'm just going to start typing in poloschools.net. And voila, it translated it to home.poloschools.net, which is that nice URL pattern that I defined earlier in my slide. This is a little bare bones. It's a little basic. Perhaps I'm not as creative as I should be, but I still think it looks a lot cleaner than what I originally did. So I was able to have a nice little banner here that I fill in as needed. So it does require some maintenance. If you got to put some stuff off or take it off, you know, like I'll post school closings in the same banner, you know, just some pertinent information here and there. So it does require a little touch and go, but it's not too bad. I also have some main quick links here that people coming to the website might want to reference, whether it's getting into our parent portal, you know, accessing our school menu, which this is kind of nice. This is actually a PDF file that I embedded from Google Drive, and it just displays it nicely for you as a school menu. Or you could just have like a regular link that just opens a PDF for you. You're really open to what kind of design you want to do. Once again, our registration forms, it's just a link straight to the Google Drive that has that, and it separates it by school. Another popular one is for our elementary school, which is Centennial up here. This is that digital backpack that I was talking about. And what it is it embeds an entire Google folder into your website. And now you've got content that parents can search out for perhaps a missed form that there's, you know, student lost or something that they threw away on accident. Now they can go to our digital backpack and peruse the documents for things that they want to perhaps access. And what I like about this Google folder integration is it's completely hands-off to me. I set up that Google folder with my service account, and then I gave the secretary to my elementary school access rights to that Google Drive. So when she has something to add to the digital backpack, she just literally drags and drops the items in there. And it maintains the inherited permissions of that folder, and it's universally available to the public per the permissions that you set up earlier. And so what went from a 13+ step process for adding an item to the digital backpack on our old website is now literally a 2 or 3 step process. Find the document, drop it in Google Drive, and boom, it's on the website. So for people that don't necessarily need to modify the website itself, they still have the opportunity to deal with the content. Another sample of that is our staff directory. Now this, I think I could probably do better, and I've been thinking about this for a while, but I just published a Google Sheet, and I gave access rights to that same secretary to that individual sheet. So she can go in, she can modify the names if we hire new staff or whatever is going on or positions change. She can go ahead and just modify that Google Sheet, change it around, and then reference, you know, the specific links through email or the website and other things that you want. Yes, Google Maps. You can integrate Google Maps into it as well. So I have our district office here. And then, of course, here's that Google Calendar that I was talking about. You really lose a lot of the flexibility that you would get in a paid website as to displaying your actual Google Calendar items. This is kind of like a throw off for the entire district, but if you were to go to, let's say, our high school, you can still embed your Google map right there. And you can change the way that the calendar item itself formats so that you might be able to just get like a weekly view or the next few days type of view. That's probably a lot of the highlights for a lot of the things that I implemented within our Google site. If there are any other questions or any other things you want to see, just feel free to ask.
Okay, real quick before we wrap up here, I want to remind everybody that the link to view this recording will be available with the email that you registered with, and that'll be available to and it'll show up in your email tomorrow. And later on, probably either this evening or tomorrow, you'll receive an email with the evaluation. You complete that, and you can get your evidence of completion hours for that also. I'll pause one more time here because it looks like, see if we got any. Chris says great stuff. Pause one last time here for any questions and see if anybody else wants to unmute themselves and ask away. Otherwise, type in the chat box also. Okay. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences with Google Sites, and appreciate you sharing and showing us how you set it up, and look forward to learning more about this in the future.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks.